let's talk a little bit about Adobe.
I remember you tried. I haven't gotten the free one. They're still asking me to pay for
Okay.
the student program, like $60 for
I've
a year or
logged
something.
in. I've like logged into the cloud. I just haven't signed up for which account.
I'm sorry.
No, no. I like have an account, but I haven't paid for any of the services. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So you use your student ID, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I apologize. We're still waiting for IT to give us the protocol, what the thing is. And so until I get that information, my hands are kind of tied at the moment. The good thing is there's not a lot of stuff that's going to be mission critical that we need it yet. We're really going to need Premiere after we shoot our first project, which will probably be happening in, let's see, if I look on my schedule here, we should probably be getting ready to shoot in about 3 weeks, our first project. So we're gonna start jumping soon, very soon into the story development stuff. So probably in about next 2 weeks, we'll get into story development. So it's all about to happen. So we've got a little bit of a buffer to get this sorted out.
I'm kind of confused because I spent like $30 to get like the entire like to get the entire Adobe Cloud for 6 months as a student.
Yeah.
So is that what was supposed to happen, or?
That was an option you could do.
Okay.
Wait, how do you do that?
Here, I'll show you.
I think that's what I did too.
Yeah. So what I think is happening, and again, this is what I'm trying to wait on, is they've got this new way for you to use Adobe, but where you basically use it through a web browser and you're running the apps on a virtual machine somewhere. So I'm hoping that gets straightened out in the next week or two. And if it doesn't get straightened out, then I'm just going to be telling everybody you just got to pony up and buy at least the 6-month version. So where is that? So if I go back up to first week here, go down day 1, 8:30, Adobe Creative Suite, click here. So this is the way we used to do it. It's probably, you still, either way, you still need to create an account, student account. So this is not going to change. But you can go down here and click on this link here, Creative Suite for 6 months. And it's going to take you to collegebuys.org. And if you go down here, you can do $40 for 6 months or $80 for 12 months, right? So depending on what you want, how much money you have. And obviously this is a great deal because guess how much the whole Adobe suite costs per month? About $55, $60 a month. So even what I tell everybody is even if you got free use through the school, I'd wait till the last semester that I'm done with the school and I'd go use this to get it for a year after, and then you still have it for a year. So if let's say I want to do the $39 one, I'm just going to click here, buy now. And you basically put your email in here, select, which 6 months. Basically you ship, there's no shipping really, you just pay for it, and then you'll get an email with an authorization. And then when you go on to log into Adobe, you put this authorization code in or whatever, and then boom, you'll get it. So this may be the best path for everybody to do. You can still hold out another week to find out whether or not, what their deal is with getting the free access to us. But here, at least for 6 months, you're going to have it on your computer working and not worrying about whether it's going to be in the cloud or you have access to the apps on your machine. And I don't know yet. I haven't had the ability to troubleshoot it and test it out properly, whether it bogs down or what's the problem with it. Because like if it's just Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator or something, it's it can run on a web browser with no problem. But when we start talking about Adobe Premiere, it may bog it down. I just don't know. So I'm hoping to get that resolved within a week. So that's unfortunately the best I can offer at the moment. So just buy your time right now, and then we'll see what happens.
Do you get to keep the license at that cheap even after you're out of school, or no?
Well, you get to keep it for the amount of time. So once you are no longer a student and the key here is you need to use your student ID. So once that ID goes away, then your ability to use Adobe products goes away. The good thing is, like, if you're a permanent, if you're going to be a student for the next couple of years, you can just keep renewing it every year and get it, and then wait to the very last day of your last semester or whatever and buy the year subscription so that you have it for a year after school, because once you buy it, you got it. They're not going to double check you or anything like that. So what is Adobe Cloud? Well, I know this is pretty obvious, but if you really look at it, Adobe has put themselves in a pretty interesting position in the industry. So if we go back in time, like 20 years, 25 years, the early days of nonlinear editing and all that, there were only a couple top dogs out there. There was not even Final Cut. It was Adobe and another company called Lightworks that were making nonlinear editing. And Adobe, if you really go back in their history, guess who kind of started developing Adobe? Maybe take a weird guess. They're somebody big in Hollywood.
Sony?
No, bigger.
Steven Spielberg?
So close. You're right. You're right in the ball game. Dun, 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 dun,
Michael Bay?
No.
No.
George Lucas.
George Lucas.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, George Lucas.
George Lucas. So George Lucas, remember, what's his big special effect company he has? Anybody know the name of it?
Lucasfilm.
Well, Lucasfilm, and underneath Lucasfilm is Industrial Light and Magic. They do all the high-end effects even to this day.
Is that a THX?
Well, THX is also underneath them. George Lucas, he's a very fascinating guy. I'll spend 2 minutes talking about him. He's going to go down in history as one of the big names that has reshaped Hollywood. Not because he's a great director, because I don't think he's really that great of a director, but he's a great innovator. Everything that we have today in Hollywood, from the big blockbusters to our Avid editing on our laptop to THX to great video screens, you can thank George Lucas for, because he pushed all that technology in the late 70s, early 80s through the 90s, all the way his company still innovates. And so he had one point realized that, before we had computers, before we had videotape, we edited on film, which means you had the film, you had this big thing called a steam deck, and I'd run the film through it, take scissors, cut, take tape, splice it, put it together, move on. Could you imagine how cumbersome that is and how much time it would take to edit something? Huge amount of time. So he realized that there had to be a better way. And so he spent some of his money, because he made all this money on Star Wars, and he made his money because he made a deal with 20th Century Fox, because he was nobody, and they gave him a small budget to make that movie. He took a pay cut in Star Wars and got points on the back end, but more importantly, got all the rights for merchandise. And nobody thought back then about merchandise. And so they're like, yeah, Star Wars, who even knows if the movie's going to be anything? Yeah, you can have the merchandising rights. It means we pay you less, sure. Biggest mistake they ever made, right? Because that's where all the money from Star Wars came from, all those toys. I remember when I was a kid, we couldn't even get those toys. They were sold out so fast. That's where all the money came from. So he built his empire off of all these toys, all this merch, And so Disney, everybody nowadays, everything's about the merchandise, right? So he started that trend. So long story short, he took all this money and realized there had to be a better way to edit. And so he found a way to use computers with software that actually controlled giant laser discs that they would take the film, translate it, transfer it to video, burn it on these discs, and have a whole basement full of these laser disc players. And they'd sit there with their computers and start doing this rough editing. And that turned into something called DroidWorks. And eventually DroidWorks, when he realized, he perfected it to a certain point, and then he finally sold it off and didn't have any use, didn't need it anymore, whatever reason. And this company Avid bought it. And so the Avid Media Composer has a direct link to this ancient editing software that George Lucas invented. So he did that. He basically also helped design sound editing, so much stuff that, if you look at it, trace his history of what he's done, it's pretty remarkable for someone who's only made a handful of films. So before then, we had Adobe before we had Adobe, we had Avid Media Composer and this company called Lightworks. These things were, that's it. So if I wanted to edit, I had to digitize everything, put it in these super low res, crappy, images, these little videos that look like, the size of, they're like 200 by 100 pixels. It was so awful resolution. You could barely see anything. It was just to make the edit. And then from there, I would take what would be an edit decision list, a printout of all the edits and the time code. And then from there, take that and go to a negative cutter and have someone actually measure out and find where those edits are in the negative, cut it, and build the film from that. So even though it still was this clunky process, that idea sped it up. So those two companies, Avid Media with Media Composer and Lightworks, were the big dogs for a while. And then Adobe started coming out with Premiere. And I will say they were the underdog at the time. Their software sucked. It was buggy, crashed all the time, wasn't that powerful. None of these editors could do 4K, or there wasn't even 4K back then. They could barely do these little postage stamp size videos that you could look at. So what Adobe was really good at was they just didn't do video. They also had Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, all these apps. So as we move forward in time, then Apple came online and brought Final Cut into the picture. Final Cut's big claim to fame was that, if I go back to Lightworks and I go back to Avid Media Composer, in order to make this stuff work with video, the computers were not powerful enough. So they had to have these outboard, devices that would hook up to the computers that did all the power processing to make this video editing possible, which was great. But the downside is these things were ungodly expensive. So just to get one Avid editing system, it was about $100,000. So mere mortals could never afford that. So Adobe comes on the line with Premiere that's, quote, could work with just computers. Never quite worked that well, but the idea was there. And then Apple came online with Final Cut Pro. And when that came on, that changed everything, because this was the first time we had editing software that actually worked on a machine that you just bought. You didn't have to buy anything else. So at that time, most Apple's computers had a FireWire input, and then you could hook up a camera that had a FireWire connector and transfer the video into there. A lot of things had to come at the same time, like camera advancement, digital cameras had to come online. There's a bunch of things that made that moment right and ripe for Apple to take advantage of it, but they did. And Final Cut at the time became a top dominator against Avid, to the point where, in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, the mid 2000s, they actually took the majority of editing away from Avid, and everybody I knew was running Final Cut. There was most of the, more than 50% of all the top films were being edited on Final Cut. So they had taken this big leap ahead of everybody else. And then, long story short, then 10 plus years ago, they realized that they needed to update Final Cut. And they decided that the architecture, the programming was ancient. It was all 32-bit. It was, it was old code that was never going to make it into the new world, what we need to do with editors today. So they made the hard decision to take Final Cut and start from scratch. And when they did that, they decided they were going to redo the interface. They were going to look at where the future of editing is going to be, and not where editing is today. And so they create this new thing called Final Cut X, has a completely different operating interface, and everybody just went, what the hell is this? Because they were not used to it. And so, and not to mention it was a bad rollout because they didn't have all the functionality they needed to make it a professional system. So what that meant was that Final Cut went from being the top dog to basically overnight dropping out, where nobody used it anymore. And that left Avid here to be, hey, we're back as the top dog. But then Adobe goes, whoa, wait, there's an opening there. And so they started spending more time and research dollars and money and R&D into Adobe Premiere. And next thing you know, over the last couple of years, Adobe gets better and better and suddenly fills the gap that Final Cut left. So we go to today, where now we have this cloud service from Adobe, where their platform, not their operating systems, their software is very mature. So Premiere, Final Cut, no, I'm sorry, Premiere, Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, these all have a timeline of 20 plus years. So that they've been very well refined to this point. And so Final Cut is making its way back. It's finally gotten back to the point where it's really usable and can be used in a professional industry. It just might be too late because everybody's moved on. So now it brings us to Adobe. So why use it? Why use this over? And we have DaVinci Resolve now. There's so many. There's quite a lot of competitors now in the market here. But what's so special about Adobe that makes it good? There's a couple things. The first thing is when you subscribe to it, and almost all of them now are subscription based. So Avid used to own, now you have to pay a subscription. The only two really that you don't pay a subscription to is Final Cut Pro. You basically buy it for life and you own it. And same thing with DaVinci Resolve. You buy it, the full-blown version, you own it. And you don't have to pay any more money. So there's some advantages to that. Adobe and Avid, you have to pay monthly for. So you're like, okay, well, that sounds like it sucks, right? So is there any advantage to that? And the answer is yeah, because when they changed their model, they made it kind of changed the way they did business. So before Adobe was a subscription service, every year they'd come out with an update. So I would have the software, and whatever bugs were in there, whatever things it didn't work, I basically was kind of stuck until when the update came. Now, occasionally they do hot fixes and if there was a big problem, but when the update came out, I'd have to pay for it. So I'd have to pay a couple $100 to get the update. So I still needed to pay for it. But what it meant was that the development cycle was really slow. So that meant that Adobe's functionality didn't get fixed or didn't evolve very quickly. So once they switched over to a cloud subscription service, well, now people are paying monthly for it. So that meant that their cash flow becomes a little bit fatter and quicker. And that allows them to spend more money on R&D, allows them to spend more money working on the code. And hence we get faster updates to Adobe products, more serviceability, and also more functionality. New functionality comes in a lot faster than it ever did before. So if you looked at it on a timeline table from day one to like the late 90s to early 2000s, slow gradual curve of improvement to Adobe. Once we go from the subscription service on, that curve suddenly rockets because they have to. If they start making products that have bugs in them, they don't fix the bugs, are you going to pay for that? No. Now that you pay monthly, you're expecting updates and everything to happen on a regular basis, new innovation. So the benefit of the cloud, the downside is you got to pay for it more. And in the end, am I paying this more money than I did before? Yeah. Am I dramatically paying more money? Not much, maybe double. Maybe if I was spending $200 to $250 a year, now I'm spending like 500 or more a year. So if you own a business, I guess it kind of balances out. But so by having the cloud service, they definitely get more innovation, and you can see it every big release that comes out. There's new things that are happening. There's all this AI stuff being incorporated into Adobe that's going to make our life as filmmakers even easier. That's the one thing. The other thing too is when you pay for it, you basically get all of their software if you buy the whole kit and caboodle. So that means I'm getting Premiere, that means I'm getting Photoshop, After Effects, Illustrator, all of it, Animator, everything they make, you get access to. And what's cool about this whole suite is that they all interact with each other. So Photoshop files open natively in Premiere with all their layers intact. So that's a big, huge difference in the way we all had to work before. If I want to bring something into After Effects, I don't have to render it out from Premiere. I just tell it to send this clip to After Effects and boom, it does it. I do all my effects in compositing or whatever in After Effects. I go back into Premiere, the timeline, it's automatically there, updated on the fly. I don't have to do anything. So there's this really tight integration between all their products that makes them a really great place to start out with. Now, does that mean that they're the perfect software? I'm not going to say that. There's definitely things about Adobe I don't like. There's certain things about Final Cut that I like over Adobe. There's things about Adobe I like over Final Cut, and there's things about DaVinci Resolve that I like over the other two, and vice versa. And so what you'll find out is as you start exploring all this software, that you may have a workflow that jumps between different pieces of software, and that's okay. But you may be totally happy with Adobe Cloud, do everything in there. They have an audio editor that you can use, or Audition, all works hand in hand with each other. So you don't get that with Final Cut. You basically get Final Cut and that's it. You get Motion, which is kind of their equivalent of After Effects, but not quite that powerful. If you go to DaVinci Resolve, you get DaVinci Resolve, you get Fusion that's kind of built into it. So DaVinci's going to a different approach where Adobe is basically giving you access to all these apps that you can work together to get your stuff done, like, you know, compositing, the editor, you know, video editing, audio editing. DaVinci is basically buying up other big companies and taking their technology and wrapping it into their software. So if you use DaVinci Resolve, well, guess what? It's got a really good audio mixer and editor built into it. It's got Fusion compositing built into it. And it's got one of the best color correction systems on the planet there. And it's got a good editor built into it. So there are two different approaches. So each you know, filmmaker, as you know, you guys make the decision which way you want to go. And if you go to Avid, well, they're still, you know, stuck in their old way. So when you pay a subscription to Avid, well, you just get the Avid Media Composer. You don't get Pro Tools, which they own too. That's a totally separate subscription. You don't get anything else. So, but they're still in more of that professional level world where, you know, I'm not saying their stuff's better than Adobe or Final Cut. I'm just saying that they're more used in the industry because they've been around that long. And when Final Cut left, opened up the gap and they kind of took over. So all of these are great things to use. And which, you know, why would you want you use Media Composer, Avid Media Composer over Adobe? Well, if you want to become an editor and you want to get a job in the industry, you got to know how to use Avid. There's no way out of it. Most 90% of the companies use Avid for good reasons. But Adobe's making their way up there. And Adobe's, I think a couple recent films may have actually been cut in Adobe. I'm not sure. I forgot which one it was. So though, you know, basically whatever editing system you learn on, it's not that hard to make a migration to another one and learn, because the concepts of editing don't change. It's just the tools and what buttons you press that kind of change, and the workflow will change a little bit. So that's the advantage, you know, I'd say over Adobe, it's integration. Downside, well, they charge you monthly. Can you get any free editing software out there? Sure, there's a couple options. The easiest one to get is DaVinci Resolve free. They make a version of DaVinci Resolve that you can download for free that is like 80% of what the full-blown version does. It does limit you a couple of things. It limits on the size of the resolution you can work in, and it limits on certain codecs that you can't work with without buying the full-blown version. But that's a great place to start. Is there any other ones? Yeah, the Lightworks, that company I said that started being the big competitor to Avid. Well, they're still around, and they actually have a fairly decent editor that is still good, and actually is one of the fastest editors to work with. They have a free version that you can use. So there's plenty of options here down the road to for editing to make a choice what you want to do. And in the end, you know, if you're going to be doing this as more professional, then you're probably going to end up buying one of them, whether it's Final Cut, DaVinci, Adobe, Avid, or even Lightworks, because they all have a paid version. The advantage to, I think the main advantage to Final Cut and DaVinci is that it's a one and done. You pay $300 for it, you're done. You've got it for forever. You get the dongle, you plug it in, new updates come, no big deal. You're not paying anything else. So there's something nice about that not having to worry about paying something for the rest of your life. But you lose out on all the other cool things that Adobe gives you, like all the other software. So tough choice, right, to figure out. But for us, you know, we're just going to make it simple and play around with Adobe right now and get to know it. And then from there, you guys can make the choice of where you want to move on beyond that. whether you stick with Adobe or move on to something else. What software we're using? Well, obviously Adobe. The main software that we're going to use in this class, obviously, is going to be Adobe Premiere Pro. The other two we're going to use is Media Encoder. We're going to learn how to use that, which is going to encode our video into specific formats. And then we're also going to play around with Adobe Bridge, which is the one that I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So Adobe Bridge is this piece of software that allows me to organize stuff. Like, it's mainly used for still images. And that's why we're going to talk about it in this class, is because we're going to use it for this assignment that you guys are kind of working on right now to help you kind of organize it. And the next assignment we're going to talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to get to that soon, but let's shift gears real quick now and talk about system requirements. So Windows and Mac, what do I need to run this type of software? So some of the things you want to think about, and again, what you have now, you got to make the best with what your computers are. But if you're planning on buying a computer, you want to really think about some of these specs of what's important. So the minimum specs are going to basically get the job done, but you're going to run into limitations at some point. So what I kind of suggest is you look at the budget of what you can spend on a computer, whether that's a new computer or a used computer, and find that somewhere where the middle point is. There's going to be the low end and the high end. And someplace in the middle is what's considered the sweet spot, where the bang for your buck kind of makes out. So here they're going to say 6th generation or newer CPUs, Ryzen AMD 1000 series or newer. I'm going to say don't even look at that. It's got to be at least 7th generation to make something in 3000, because specifically if you start working with more 4K material, 1080, you can get away with it. You're not doing a lot of effects, you can get away with it. But the minute you start working with like 4K and start doing a lot of color correction or effects, your computer is going to get ground down to a halt. So that's the first thing you want to think about. Windows, yeah. Memory, let's talk about memory. 8K RAM, forget it. It's a joke, don't even bother. These are the real numbers, 16 minimum. 32 is better. That's what I run. I'm running on my laptop 32 gigs, and that's just enough. And I'm going to probably next one go even bigger. So we start looking at the real specs. Really, this side is just to play around with like low level stuff. Anything serious, we got to really look at this side. So you can get a decent 7th generation CPU fairly inexpensive and not go for the 9th or the bigger ones. We're going to talk about Mac versus Windows in a little bit and stuff like that. But here's the magic number. You got to have at least 16 gigabyte. I would say lean towards 32, because this is going to eat up a lot of memory. And it's going to, the more memory you have, the more fluid everything's going to work, and it's not going to bog down. Your timeline's not going to shudder and drag. It's just going to be easier. Here's the next thing, GPU, graphic processing unit, okay? This has been a big game player in the last 5 to 10 years. So anybody here gamers? Nobody here is a big gamer? Wow.
A little bit, but
What's that? A little bit? What's
I mean,
important?
only games like The
a little bit.
Sims.
Okay. So big gaming machines, what do you think is the most important component of a good gaming computer?
Graphics card.
Video.
Exactly, graphic card. So what's changed? If we go back in time and talk about editors, back in 20 years ago, when Adobe Premiere was first starting out, the CPU, the central processing unit, that's the chip that's in your computer that does everything. That basically did everything. That did the graphics, that mixed the audio, that did the effects, everything. And now as gaming computers got better and gaming GPUs got more powerful, all the editors started switching over to having the graphic processors start handling the bigger load of the work. So that means the computer, the CPU, might still handle all the file moving and simple stuff, but any transitions, any color correction, the decompressing of compressed files or raw files, all that stuff over the years has been handed off to the GPUs because they're just better at it. They can hammer through that stuff incredibly fast. And so as we move every year forward, GPUs become more and more important in our computers, whether it's for editing or for gameplay, you name it. So when you start looking about getting a decent system for editing, you really have to think about the RAM, but most importantly, you got to think about the GPU. I need to have as powerful of a GPU as I can afford. That's the game here. So even if it means, well, I can't afford a 32 gigabytes of RAM and a fast GPU, so I'd better off drop the 16 gigabytes of RAM and spend more money on the better GPU. Because in the end, the GPU is going to trump all the other components. My GPU sucks. It doesn't matter how much RAM I have, how fast my CPU is. The system's going to grind down to a halt because the bottleneck is going to be in the GPU. So this is where you spend your money. So for example, I updated one of my Mac towers last year, and I bought the fastest GPU I could put in it because I knew I needed it, and it's cost me $600 just for that one GPU, which is steal at the time. But that's where I put the money in because I knew that was going to speed everything up, and of course it did. So GPU is number one on the list. Then I would say CPU, and then memory is the order of what you can afford. Any questions so far? There's got to be some questions.
It's possible to be able to use Premiere Pro effectively with 8 RAM.
You can, and it will work, but it will slow down at some point. So
because I recently got a laptop like a few months ago with 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I've been running Adobe Premiere Pro for as long as I've had the laptop, so it hasn't been too much of a problem. But I would wonder if it would actually slow down within any time soon.
Well, again, take what I'm telling you with a grain of salt, because what I'm talking about is, as you progress forward and get more complicated, more advanced stuff, work with bigger codecs and stuff like that. When you're first starting out, the best, obviously computer is the one you can afford. And if you can get Adobe running at 8 gigabytes of RAM and everything, and it works, great. But when you start getting bigger projects, so let's say you get to a point where you're cutting 45-minute shows or something on your laptop with 4K footage, and you're doing multiple composites in there, you will see that the RAM will eventually drop down. But let's just say at that point of the game, you're already ready to buy your next computer, right? So it's not like these minimum specs are going to stop you from being able to run Adobe. It will. You just might not get that fluid experience. And if someone's paying you to edit, let's say, for example, you can't have the computer bogging down. You have to have a computer that really will hammer through it, because time is money, right? And if it takes the minimum spec computer 2 hours to render out a timeline, where the high-end one can render it out in half an hour, well, there's a big difference in price right there of how much money you're charging somebody, or how much time and energy it is. So I'm just giving you like the professional point of view on where these specs need to land in order to successfully have a fully capable machine. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So if you don't get all bent out of shape about these specs, this is what we're talking about, what people, what maybe the long-term goal is what you need to do. But if you're looking to buy something now, like you're like, all right, well, I got to buy a new computer now, you're in a really good market now, because I'll get to that in a few minutes about, what to buy. But there's lots of great options out there nowadays. But GPU is probably the most important thing. If you're going to sacrifice everything, this is what you don't sacrifice: the GPU, because if you get a crappy GPU, not super powerful, it's going to slow everything else down. I can always add RAM mostly to my computer. Intel chips, not really. If it's a laptop, but desktop, yeah, I could probably put a new chip in there. I could always update the RAM. Can I get a new graphic card? Yeah, but where am I going to spend my money first? I'm going to spend it here, graphic card. All right, the next thing is hard drives. So technology is of course advancing and changing, And back in the day, we had to have really high-end, expensive hard drives that were RAID compatible, even before that, SCSI drives, just to be able to handle video. And just to put it in perspective of what that comes out to cost. So back in 1995, we built a workstation to run Adobe Premiere, and we had the special digitizing board that we spent, the board alone just to digitize video, we spent, I think, $4,000 on just to get the video into the computer. We had to put what were called SCSI drives into the computer. These drives were 9 gigabyte drives, gigabyte I'm saying, and we had to get 3 of them, and each one of them cost about $4,000. So the price to get in, even in a build your own kit back then, was still like over 10 grand to get something that actually could do the job. Thank God today computers have evolved and gotten better. So today we don't have to worry too much about having the specialized drives. Now I say that with a clause in it, because obviously when you start dealing with raw workflows with like 8K raw footage, you're going to need a fast drive to handle that. But the beauty of today's system is that we all have these little solid state drives, right? SSDs are super incredibly fast, fairly inexpensive, and work great for editing. So what I tell most everybody nowadays, as long as you have a computer that has either Thunderbolt in it, or has USB 3.1 specifically, if you got it, or even better, USB-C, if you can afford a decent sized solid state drive to handle it, you're in a good position. So for example, this little G drive here, all right? So I bought this about maybe 2 years ago. 2 terabytes cost me probably about $300, but I can edit pretty much almost anything on this and not really bog it down, because it's so fast now. And if you think about what I just said before about how much the drives cost when the first started out, nothing. So when you're going to edit video, here's the rules of thumb. You don't really want to edit the video on your laptop or on your internal drive. Now, I know you might say, well, I just bought a brand new computer and it's got a solid state drive and it's fast enough. Yeah, it probably is. But the problem with putting all your footage on the internal hard drive is that most computers, and specifically if you have not a lot of RAM, the operating system, whether it's Windows or Mac or Linux, is going to do what's swap files, which means as the data, the memory fills up inside the RAM and it can't handle anymore, it's going to dump that to the hard drive and then fill it up again, and then it's going to swap back and forth between these. So it's going to access the hard drive back and forth. And even if you've got a really fast solid state drive on the inside of your computer, if you start editing and say you have a lot of cuts and a lot of transitions, let's say that you did multi-camera coverage and you've got like 3 layers of multi-camera files and you're doing transitions between them, the computer is constantly accessing the hard drive. So as it's doing that, and all of a sudden if the memory needs to be swapped out, it's going to bog down your system at a moment. So most everybody I know, when they're doing like serious editing, and I'm not talking about like the quick edit with your family and you shot something or a little quick YouTube thing, yeah, that's fine. But if I'm doing a long-term project, I'm always going to put it on an external hard drive and run it off of there. And that's what I recommend you guys do. I recommend you, even now, if you remember I talked about getting a hard drive for the class, you really want to put everything on an external drive. And this way, it's separate from the system drive. You don't have to worry about bogging it down or filling it up. Also, these apps like Premiere and Final Cut are going to render stuff out and they're going to write it. So if you think you have enough room on your hard drive, guess what? It's going to keep writing and writing and writing. And it may fill up your hard drive. And if it does fill up your computer hard drive, be it Windows or Mac, guess what's going to happen to your computer? It's going to crash because it's going to run out of room and it's going to bog down. So I always strongly suggest edit off an external hard drive. These are the best ones to get, a solid state drive. You can't afford that, then sure, get a spinning disk drive. Whatever you can afford, that's really the name of the game. When I look at hard drives, if they're spinning drives, the magic number is 7,200 RPM. Most drives nowadays are 7,200 RPM. What that means is the platters inside the disk are spinning fast enough that they're quick. If you get a drive that's cheaper, it may be a 5,200 RPM drive, and you might have bogging down issues that may happen when you're editing. So we kind of stick to that. And if I'm even getting more advanced, so when I start working with, even with these solid state drives, if I'm doing like really, really elaborate 4K or 8K raw productions, I'm going to have a RAID system that's going to be super fast. And so what a RAID is basically a whole bunch of drives that are all linked together, and they look like one big drive. And instead of writing to each individual drive, as the file gets sent to the RAID, it's split up into each drive. And so what that means is that if I've got 4 drives, that means it's 4 times faster to read and write than one drive. That's the short of it. So most high-end systems are going to work with a RAID. And if they're really high-end, they're going to work with a RAID drive of these SSDs. But now you're really talking about expensive investments. So you're looking at like thousands of dollars for a RAID system that can do stuff like that. So for most of us mere mortals, buying a good solid state drive will give you like 99% of all your editing needs to get the job done. Any questions?
I had a question about editing on the external hard drive, because it says that you can't, what does it say on here? Oh, that you can't install it on the removable hard drive, but you can use it on there?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So it's going to install on your system drive, which is where it should be. That's where it needs to be.
Okay,
so yeah.
And then we're going to go over, I mean, I'm sure that the Mac is pretty similar to this, right? The requirements?
Yes, very much.
Okay.
In fact, we're getting close to talking about that in a minute. I just wanted to kind of get through all this stuff. So these are the basic, what you need to know, right? 7th generation, a decent computer, 8 gig to just get the job done. 16 is great. 32, you're styling. This is important, the GPU. They say 2 gigabytes of GPU RAM. No, it's a lot higher. If you're going to spend the money on a GPU card, you want to spend it with more than 4 gigabytes. For example, I've got 16 gigabytes on mine. I spent the extra money on it because I knew how important it was for 4K, 6K, 8K editing. So this is, and in the end, this is where you're going to spend your money. This is what's going to change your speed of your computer. What's beauty of this system is that I can have a laptop that has a underperforming GPU. And if I want to boost up my laptop and make it more powerful for editing, I'm just going to buy a GPU and put it in an external housing and plug it into this laptop, and boom, suddenly my computer is way more powerful. So that's what's really cool about technology today that you can do. Hard disk, well, we're just going to try and use an external SSD. Your internal drive, it should be SSD. Most computers nowadays are SSD. If you have an older one, well, you can you swap it out? You can, but is it worth doing that? Not quite sure at the moment, depending on the machine.